Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cheryl if you're new here, and today I'm here to bring you my November-December wrap-up. So the reason I'm lumping both of these months together is because ya girl's not good at booktube, and I realized that I still hadn't uploaded my November wrap-up like more than halfway through November, so I was like, I'm just gonna wait and do both November and December because I didn't read very much during either of those months. I have a total of 6 books to talk about today, so it made more sense to just lump them together as opposed to just forgetting to do it all together. And so without further ado, I'm going to talk about the books that I read during November and December, give you a brief synopsis of each one, tell you what I liked, what I didn't like about it, my star rating, all of that. I'm just going to go in the order that they are stacked next to me. It is not the order I read them, nor is it the order of my star rating. If you guys have a preference on how to organize these videos, just leave me a comment, let me know if you prefer it to be by star rating, if you prefer it to be in order read, or if you don't really give a shit. Let me know down below. I know a lot of people organize their wrap-ups in different ways, and I'm looking for a way to do it for the new year. But yes, without further ado, let's just get into this. So the first book I'm going to talk about is one that made its way onto my least favorite books of 2017 as a whole list, so you will have heard me talk about this recently if you watched that video, and that is Asylum by Madeline Rue. I give this book a 1.5 stars. It was not good. If you are interested in my thoughts, you can watch that video, or I will leave my link to my Goodreads review of this down below. Basically, I found this book cliche. I found it boring. It was trying to live off the hype of Miss Peregrine's because it's spooky. It has photos, like creepy photos, but I just felt like it was so poorly constructed. The characters just were bad. They didn't make sense. They didn't make the decisions that they should have based on their character traits, and they acted just very oddly, and it wasn't good. It just wasn't good. I do not recommend this series. I will not be continuing this series, and I will probably be unhauling this book very soon because I don't like looking at it. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Fifth Wave by Rick Yancey. I finally read this book. I listened to it via audiobook, and it was alright. I gave it a 3 stars. There was nothing really that spectacular about it. If you don't know already, this book follows like an alien invasion, and aliens have attacked Earth in different waves. One wave was, I think the first one was an EMP, which knocked out all power and electricity, all computers, etc. Then there was a disease wave, which were carried by birds, and so there was just different ways that they attacked, and I thought that aspect was interesting, that it wasn't just like, let's invade and shoot you down with guns. Like, there were different aspects to it. But beyond that, it was just a dystopian novel. It was just a, hey, let's survive. There was a really unnecessary romance in it that felt very, very forced and kind of awkward. And every plot twist that it tried to throw just was kind of obvious it was going to happen. And so I am going to be unhauling this one, even though I gave it a 3 stars, just because it wasn't spectacular, and I don't know if I'm going to continue the Infinite Sea. Like, I was interested enough in the story that maybe one day I'll pick it up, but it wasn't like, oh my god, I need the next book now. All I can really say about this book is that it was kind of unremarkable, which is why I gave it a 3 star. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Lot of Elves by, God, I can never say his name, Andrzej Sapkowski, which is the first book in the original trilogy of the Witcher series. And this is the first book he published. He published this trilogy, and then he published 2 books of short stories, which chronologically come before this, but this is like the first one in the original. It's not short stories, it's an actual novel, and then they're actually he's continuing the series because of the success of the video games. And I started playing the 3rd one and fell in love with it, and so my husband got me the original trilogy to read, and I read the first one, obviously. More or less, this is a fantasy world that is inhabited by a lot of different creatures: humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes, etc. And then there's also monsters, ghouls, and just bad things, and witches, and demons, and wights, and ghosts, and just all sorts of nasty creatures. And witchers are people who are trained and mutated in order to fight these monsters super efficiently. They do it for money. It is their job. And as a result, they're kind of hated. And so Geralt is a very famed witcher. He is very good at what he does. And so Geralt ends up getting mixed in a lot of politics as he lays claim to a child who was prophesized. She is going to have like immense powers, and she is hunted for these powers, and so he's trying to keep her safe. And so this is kind of like her as a child. But the problem I had with this book, because I gave it a 3.5, I expected to give it a higher rating, but the problem I had is that it jumped a lot. Like, from one chapter she'd be really young to the next chapter it would be like 2 years later, and it wasn't like consistently done. And honestly, a lot of this book was just kind of boring. It was travel, it was just talking, the characters weren't very fleshed out, and so I'm gonna give it a pass as the first book in the series, because I believe it's his first book published, and it's also a translated work. It was originally written in Polish, and so I think some of the awkward grammar and the awkward writing came from it being both his first book and being translated. I do not speak Polish, so I cannot read the original to know if it's still awkwardly written. Overall, I mean, I enjoyed this. This book doesn't really follow Geralt that much, which is kind of surprising considering he's like the main character of the series. He maybe gets like one or two chapters in his perspective. The rest follow either Ciri or other characters. And while I enjoy other characters, it didn't feel the same. I do have high hopes as I continue the series, which I am definitely going to do, even though I did give this one a lower rating. I've rambled about this book enough. If you have not picked up this series yet, I would recommend it. If you have not picked up the third video game, Witcher 3, I would recommend it. So the next book I'm going to talk about is one that I don't really know how to talk about, and that is The Unnoticeables by Robert Brockway. I gave this one a 4 stars. It is very short. It is maybe like not even 300 pages. I read it, most of this in one sitting. I will say that it pulled me out of my reading slump that I had towards the beginning of November. It was such a quick and fast read. This book is weird. If you've read anything by David Wong, his John Dies at the End series, he's got Futuristic Violence and Fancy Suits. Both of those books are written in a very weird, humorous, but dark humor kind of way, and this is exactly the same way. I don't know if it's because they both were editors at Cracked, but that is exactly how this book is. So if you've liked those series, or if you've liked those books, I think you'll like this one. It also reminds me a little bit of Welcome to Night Vale, because there's angels in this book, but they're not nice. They're not benevolent. They control the fates, and they watch people's lives for redundancies, and they analyze them, and if they find redundancies, they remove them, and if you're the redundancy, they remove you, and it's very odd. It follows 2 perspectives. It follows Carrie, who is a punk living in the 1970s, and it follows what is her name? Caitlin. She lives in modern day. They're both investigating the same story. It kind of comes to a head. They both meet in the present day. Carrie deals with it in the 70s, and then it comes back again, obviously. And Caitlin starts dealing with it, and then she meets up with Carrie, and they go try to solve the issue together. I think what was really cool, and what the name comes from, is that in this world, like I said, there's angels, and then to do kind of the angels' bidding, there are these creatures called the Unnoticeables. And the Unnoticeables are people who the main characters realize that they'll know them as a person, but if they leave their sight, they can't recall any physical features about them, they can't remember them, and so they kind of slip by and watch and do the angels' bidding without ever being noticed, and you have to concentrate really, really hard to remember that they exist and to remember anything about them. And so the concept is really creepy. If you're talking to someone and they walk away and just automatically you kind of forget about them, they're able to slip in and out of societies very easily. And then the monster of the novel, they're called tarmen. I don't remember if there's another a name for them. Basically, they're creatures that are covered in tar, and if the tar touches you, it burns your flesh, and so they're also lurking around. And Carrie's noticing all of this and is one of the only people that noticed the Unnoticeables, and the fact that these people are just he's this isn't right, this isn't normal, something's going on, and investigates further. It's kind of a sloppy synopsis of this book because it is a very hard book to describe. Overall, I enjoyed it. Like I said, it was fast-paced, it was crazy. I did have some issues with the characters, and Carrie would be misogynistic, and realize he's being misogynistic and recognize it but do nothing to correct it. And I don't know if that's like a commentary on the punk culture. It was like the author was asking us to like acknowledge him for being a good person, for understanding that he was being misogynistic but then didn't do anything. I do have a full review of this one on Goodreads as well. Well, if I think I do for most of these books, and I'll leave all those linked down below, or you can just follow me on Goodreads if you haven't already to get live updates. Overall, this book was just really weird. I enjoyed it, but it was really weird. Alright, the next book I'm going to talk about is Every Last Word. I don't remember who this is by. I'll pop a picture up. And I gave this book 3 stars. I remember hearing some people talk about this, and so I picked it up, and it was alright. I'm not a huge contemporary person, so I wasn't expecting a whole lot. It is about a character who gets into poetry and also deals with like obsessive compulsive thoughts and spirals, and it deals a lot with mental health. I just felt like the characters made decisions that were a little like weird and didn't quite make sense, and there were aspects of this book that just seemed underdeveloped or unnecessary. Overall, it wasn't my favorite book I've read. I appreciate certain things it was trying to do and trying to like explore, but I just didn't feel like it was executed as well as it could have been. But like I said, I also am not a huge fan of contemporary, so I didn't like the main character very much either. But yeah, so I give this one 3 stars. It was just average. And so the last book I read is one that I wanted to read by the end of the year, so I'm very happy I did, and that is Homeland by R.A. Salvatore. This is the first book in the Forgotten Realms. So this is a work inspired by D&D, I guess, kind of giving you the history and the lore behind different races and different creatures. This is definitely like origin stories, and so there are 10 different series within this world. This is the first book of the first series, so I started from the very beginning. This in particular follows Drizzt. Drizzt is a dark elf, and dark elf in this world are just notoriously evil. If you are aware of like the alignments, they are chaotic evil, and typically, and they live underground. The society they live in is matriarchal. Women have all of the power. Some men can be powerful, but they're still just pawns of the women. I appreciated that aspect because it was different than what you normally read about, especially in fantasy, which have very patriarchal societies usually. They also pride themselves on subterfuge and sabotage and backstabbing. So, for example, there are major houses in this world, or in this society. There are ruling houses who convene in a big council, and there are top 8 ruling houses, and in order to move up in the position, you have to eliminate the house above you, or a house above you, and to eliminate them, obviously, you have to sneak in and kill them, and if you manage to do that and leave no survivors, then that's good. You've moved up. Because there are no survivors, then there's no one to call you out. Even if there are witnesses, that's not the same as people involved. If your neighbor notices, they just kind of watch. But like, if one of the house survives, they can be like, oh, this person attacked me, this family attacked me, and thus laws will be enacted to punish the family who attacked. But if it is completely successful, then they gain favor in the eyes of their spider goddess, and then they get to move on up. So it really prides itself in like just a subterfuge, I guess. Their spider queen loves sacrifices, and she's not good. My issue that I had with this book, because I gave it a 4.5, I couldn't quite give it a 5 stars because, one, Drizzt is just, he is like the biggest scary stew. I enjoyed reading his perspective. Basically, he struggles for the entire book, which takes place over a lot of years, because dark elves can live to be like 800 years old plus. So a chapter would be like, between chapters, like 10 years would go by, because they live a long fucking time. It kind of has to. And so this follows Drizzt as he's growing up and learning the ways of Drow society, and the fact that he just can't seem to understand why people are evil. He can't seem to understand why they will stab each other in the back for power, for glory. He's way, way more like empathetic than anyone else in his society, and just doesn't understand it, and he starts to hate his society for being so evil. and so he's questioning everything. But he also rises through the ranks and gets trained and just becomes so overly powerful by the end of this first book. And that's the problem I have, is like, if it's a seemingly impossible task, Drizzt can do it right away. He's special. He's just so strong, so powerful. And so that's one of the issues I had with this book. Also, I get that they're supposed to just be chaotic and they're supposed to be evil, but I have an issue with people being, like, the concept of evil for the sake of evil. I like my villains and like people to be evil because of a reason, to have a backstory, not just to be born evil. And so for an entire society just to be born evil, it's hard for me to wrap around, because I'm just like, well, why are they evil? That's another issue I had with it. But I mean, a 4.5 is still a very high rating. I enjoyed this book a lot. I'm definitely looking forward to picking up the next one, Exile, and seeing what Drizzt gets up to next. The world of the Underdark is really interesting because, like I said, they live underground. They see in like infrared as opposed to regular vision. Light blinds them, and there are a lot of different creatures that live underground as well. Some of them friendly, some of them not so friendly. In fact, most of them not so friendly. I'm very interested to see what happens next. I know through the events of the next book, the world's going to be expanded a little further. Just overall, I enjoyed this book. If you like D&D, even if you don't, if you like fantasy books, I would recommend picking this one up because it is true, just fantasy. Those are all the books I read in the months of November/December. I enjoyed pretty much everything I read, except for Asylum. I also read quite a few mediocre books, but, you know, it happens. I'm looking forward to what I read in January. I already finished one book, and I enjoyed it so much. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!